Over 3 years ago, there was an infamous post on the Fire Emblem Reddit which led to a Famiboards post by someone named Emily, who leaked some major points about Fire Emblem Engage. And while there was a large amount of skepticism at the time around how true the leaks were, well, as we now know today, they ended up being 100% real, making it so that these posts would start popping back up once Engage was announced officially. And that's because while the Engage leak was the main focus of these posts, there was another piece of crucial information revealed around that time that fans have been clinging on to ever since. See, a day later, a user by the name Miasma Delta corroborated the original post with screenshots saying the next FE game was definitely real, and he ended up being right. But there was another important piece of information in Miasma's post that wasn't part of the Famiboards leak, and that was the existence of a Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War remake. And mind you, it was a single sentence within the post, but to this day, it has been the tiny bit of fuel that was needed to span a never-ending amount of speculation around this game's existence or not. And with every new Nintendo Direct that is announced, Fire Emblem fans like me have been putting on their clown makeup and hoping for the elusive remake to finally be announced. But as we all know, it hasn't been announced yet. So what exactly do we know about this remake? Well, that's what I'll be talking about in today's video. First of all, in the spirit of transparency and not to waste your time, we don't actually know anything for sure, as there aren't a ton of credible leaks and official information about whether this game exists or not. There's only a few places where people tend to be pulling their information on, and I will break them down in this video. Also, just to be clear, I myself, Kratos, have no contacts at Nintendo. I am not an insider. I'm just a silly little guy doing silly little videos on the internet, okay? So everything I'm reporting on today comes from other sources, which will all be linked in the description of the video. And the other part of this video is going to be speculative and just my analysis of the whole situation. But I will tell you when we get to that part. Do not worry. Now that this is out of the way, what do we know? The reality of it is most of it comes from the previously mentioned leak, which is, I would say, one of the most credible source, really. And it's not because this user is like a known insider that constantly leaks stuff accurately, because if you look at his Reddit account, this seems to be a burner account. They've only ever posted about this leak and responded to this specific Reddit thread. So we can't really corroborate the user itself if they are legit or not. What does bring some veracity to the post is the Engage leaks ended up being pretty damn accurate, with the pictures being posted with the post being almost a one-for-one recreation and maybe a little bit lower quality environment of the actual final product the game was. So while the one line might seem like just a throwaway line, since an FE4 remake even at the time was kind of a logical assumption, the post does have a level of credence to it. The next piece of credible leak comes from a YouTube channel called Player Essence. About a month ago, he made a video looking at the timeline of Fire Emblem games on the Switch, and he said that a few sources told him that the new Fire Emblem game is indeed coming. He did not give a date or anything, but that leads me to believe that this game is to be coming soon, if a month ago they were told that there was a new Fire Emblem coming. And the other piece of information they were told is that the development started in 2022. He did work under the assumption in his video that it was an FE4 remake, but his source didn't give him more information than the game has been now in development for almost 3 years. And while that might not seem like a lot since Engage was only released 2 years ago, we need to remember that initial post that Engage had been done, or at least close to done, for about a year when the original leaks took place. Engage was apparently delayed a couple of times, unfortunately, which made it so that it got a later release than it was supposed to. So they were apparently done with it a long time before the game was actually released. Also, if you remember Engage's launch, once the game was released, the DLC came out not that long after the game was released, and the support support for the game by Intelligence System was a very short window of time, indicating to me that they had probably already moved on to the next project, which would be the next Fire Emblem game, for at least some time at the time of release. What that leads me to believe is that an announcement in the near future is probably close, and with some of the things I'm going to talk about later in the video, it could definitely make sense. While I don't know OJ from Player Essence that well, and I'm not an avid watcher of his content, the few videos I've come across from him usually seem well researched and pretty accurate, so I am keen to believe that information, but you always have to be very careful about what you read on the internet and what you believe. In his video, however, he does mention a pretty reputable leaker who has been generally accurate in terms of Nintendo leaks in the past, and that being Nate the Hate. So again, Nate the Hate is not somebody I'm extremely personally familiar with. I have looked online and he does seem to have a pretty good reputation. And in his latest podcast, he did reveal the date of the Switch 2 announcement, like on the dot. He released it 3 days before and he said it was going to be on the 16th, and it ended up being on the 16th. So I do think he might have access to information that you and I don't generally have. And Nate, from what I've seen of the discussion online, seems to have been pretty adamant about an FE4 remake being the next FE game in the franchise, even talking about it in his latest podcast episode at the 4-minute 51 mark, and then again at the 13-minute 30-second mark. So if you're interested in going to watch the podcast to maybe learn more, he does just briefly kind of talk about it, but doesn't go that much into detail about anything else. One thing that did pique my interest is that he includes the FE4 remake in his portion where he talks about the last wave of games he's expecting for the life of the original Switch, and not as a title that would be released for Switch 2. So apparently, according to him and a lot of the internet from what I'm seeing, there will be a direct in February. Again, take that with a grain of salt. I don't know. I don't have sources in Nintendo. And that direct in February before the April one, which we already know because Nintendo announced it to talk about the Switch 2. This February direct would be to talk about the last wave of games for the original Switch before moving on to the Switch 2. And a lot of people are expecting the FE4 remake to be part of that lineup. And it does kind of make sense because that game has been rumored for the Switch. It just seems logical that it might be developed for the Switch, but we'll get to talking about that in a few minutes. And truly, that is all we really know around this game. And when I say no, I mean it with like a huge grain of salt, because it all comes from leaks. It all comes from people told me X. So there's always a level of skepticism I try to have with these things, because I don't know, man. Some people do have sources for sure because they know people at Nintendo, but I find it always like something that you need to approach with carefulness, because anybody has been writing a bunch of crap on the internet. As we all kind of know, with every new direct that is announced, there seems to be a wave of fake leaks that follows it. Like a bunch of fake Twitter accounts and Reddit posts just start popping up saying like these games are going to be announced, and then none of them are. So it's hard to know what is actually fact and what is hope or an educated guess by these people. But in this video, I decided to talk about really what the ones I thought were the most on the up and up, because they seem to have kind of a track record. They seem to have some kind of seriousness attached to them. And while I do think the FE4 is the next game in the franchise, because it is a logical assumption, I do think it could be a brand new game in the franchise. Always is possible. You never know. If they've kept things under wraps as much as they have, it can be hard to know, really. But again, as I said, it's a logical assumption given how long it's been since the last remake. And it's about the same time frame that was between the release of Fire Emblem Echoes, Shadow of Valentia, and New Mystery of the Emblem, which had a 7-year gap. And now we are at an 8-year gap between Echoes and the next quote-unquote potential remake. And it would be logical given that Engage was released later than it should have been. It was delayed. So maybe they were planning that Genealogy game for 2024 initially, but ended up having it to push it back because of Engage. We don't know. Another point that does lead me to believe that it might be a remake, there seems to be a pattern since New Mystery again, where they seem to release 2 brand new mainline games between each remake. It's only happened like since then, so it's a very limited amount of data set, but it would then make sense that the logical next step would be a remake after Engage and Three Houses were released on the Switch. But this is just speculation on my end. This is just me kind of like looking at Wikipedia, be like, that just makes sense, man. I don't know if this is a philosophy intelligence system has or not. Additionally to all that, a big argument that people tend to have, a big point that they tend to make when it comes to why Genealogy will be the next game is because of Sigurd having a more central role in Engage than most other emblems. So people tend to use that as an indicator that they are looking to familiarize Western audiences to this character to probably ride some hype into the remake of FE4. That's a very common talking point you see in a lot of Reddit threads and a lot of YouTube videos. And I don't think it's a bad logical assumption. It does generally seem to track, since the OG game was never released in the West, and I think Nintendo wants to avoid another Echo situation in terms of sales, because unfortunately it did pretty poorly in terms of sales. There are a lot of factors to that. I do think releasing it on an end-of-life console such as the 3DS might have hurt it when the Switch was coming out, but you know, maybe not being familiar with the cast or hearing remake but having none of that nostalgia made consumers not want to get it. I think the Echo sales discussion is a deeper one that goes beyond the scope of this video, so it'll be something we'll have to circle back to if you guys want to. Let me know in the comments. Now let's get to analyzing this information and distilling it all in one place. So the crux of the discussion seems to be focused on Genealogy's remake being a Switch 1 game. That seems to be the general thought process of most of these insiders and news aggregates and just general gaming news YouTube channels, with heavy speculation that this February's Direct will be when it's announced. And while I think it's very logical, since Nintendo needs a strong lineup of games to finish the Switch life cycle before the Switch 2 releases, which is also expected around the summer of 2025. I saw, I think, a date May 9th somewhere. I don't know how true that one is. That was from a news page, so I'm not sure if it's true, but they're thinking summer of 2025 mostly. So that's kind of soon when you think about it. And this point was discussed in Nate the Hate's podcast episode, which I will have linked below. The other data point that seems to indicate the next FE game will be an end-of-life title is that Fire Emblem, for this might just be a coincidence, by the way, but seems to be Nintendo's go-to franchise for the end of a console's lifespan. And I'd like to thank Reddit user CyberChaos for pointing that out in this post that you're seeing right now. If you look at his comment, you should see that Fire Emblem games have a history of coming out near a console's end of life cycle. And when the Switch was releasing, Echoes, the latest remake, was also released like that. We did talk about it a little earlier. I think it hurt the sales a little bit, but maybe they're looking to do it again. Furthermore, with how long this game has been rumored to be in development, it is very logical that this game was developed initially for the Nintendo Switch. So it would make sense that the initial thought was to be on the Switch. But I don't think that's the case. I think we'll have to wait a little longer for an FE4 remake. Again, I'm not an insider. It's just me spitballing here. Given FE4's remake being rumored for so long, I think the game has gone through a series of delays or update in its development that ended up pushing it back. And if you've watched my live stream before, this question's come up here and there, and I've said before on record, so there's probably a clip out there you can find. I was expecting this game to be part of the Switch 2 launch lineup of games, because I do think while it was initially for the Switch 1, I think the delays made them reconsider the console they were going to release it on. But recent leaks have muddled the waters a little bit on my theory, as a few days ago, it seems that the launch games list has leaked. I don't know once again how legit this new sets of leak is, because I do not know the source and I only saw a couple of articles releasing like in the same time span talking about it. But it seems to follow in the steps of, once again, what Nate the Hate was speaking on in his latest podcast episode. So again, I don't know if the leaks are just rumors and speculation repackaged to seem like insider information, or they are legit. But there's no word of an FE4 remake in that initial lineup. So my theory, if we take what we have here at face value, is technically wrong. But it might be in the end that just some things managed to stay under wraps or weren't really like widespread knowledge. Could be that, you know, they just got a part of the list. But if the lineup of game you're seeing right now for the Switch 2's release is true, I, as a Fire Emblem fan, don't really want to see an FE game with this lineup, because that will affect the sales of this remake extremely negatively, in my opinion. Yes, I know that before you get in the comments, I know that Fire Emblem is niche enough and it has its own little fan base that will pick up the games no matter what. But there is a big portion of people who buy these games who are more casual Nintendo fans. And with the new console releasing and price of games nowadays being $80 and plus, people will probably be picking up maybe one game or two with the new console as it releases, because it's a lot of money, man. And if you add Fire Emblem to this mix, I'm not seeing a world where a lot of the more casual audience that picks up these games chooses Fire Emblem over Mario Kart, or a new 3D Mario, or a Legend of Zelda remake of a quote-unquote classic game. And even Metroid, even though it's also a pretty niche franchise now for Nintendo, I don't think Nintendo is looking to create even more competition with itself by splitting the sales of their games this much on so many different titles. So I think for Nintendo, waiting to release FE4's remake for maybe the holidays or for 2026 sounds like a more interesting financial proposal for them. And you may wonder why I'm so adamant about this game specifically being released on Switch 2. Again, this is just my speculation. The main reason has to do with the Nintendo Switch having limited hardware. So Fire Emblem now, for a while, if you've been following the game for a long time, has gone all in on 3D. They really want the graphics to be 3D, everything 3D. That's what they're going forward with the games, as we've seen in Three Houses and Engage, and even before that. And they've made significant strides, especially when you look from Three Houses to Engage, in terms of the animations and just the performance. But while I think that Engage had some amazing animation work, especially for combat animations, they'll probably look to upscale even more from what they've already done. Also, while significantly changing the art direction, since FE4 is a much darker game and much more serious in tone than Engage was. But with that being said, if they are looking to stay in that 3D direction with FE4, they'll run into significant issues, I think, because of the one defining characteristic of Genealogy of the Holy War. It's that the maps are the largest in the series. These maps are huge. They are meant to simulate battles over a period of many months, which is a pretty large scale endeavor. So rendering those in full 3D with enhanced graphic might be a tall order for the Switch and its limited hardware capabilities. And I think Nintendo, much like the rest of us, saw the backlash that was aimed at Pokemon Scarlet and Violet a few years ago when it released and had significant frame drop, graphical issues on launch, because the game was simply too tall of an order for the Switch. And look, intelligent systems might be better at optimization than Game Freak is, or they may have found ways to make the game look good on the Switch without compromising the large maps, but I think the Switch one will have a hard time delivering on the spirit and the vibes that this game needs to have with very nice looking 3D graphics if it's on the Switch one. I guess we'll find out when they announce it. Also, I just want to say, if it's true that the next direct happens within the next couple of weeks, and it turns out I'm wrong and the remake is announced for the Switch and not the Switch 2, you have all the rights in the world to come to this comment section and call me a dumbass. Because this is simply me making a slightly educated guess based on what seems logical. Let's hope I'm right and y'all come back in like a year and say you were right, man, but you know, I won't hold my breath that that will happen. Alright, so to summarize, I think the two most likely options, if again this game is even real, FE4's remake is most likely going to be either a Switch 1 or a Switch 2 game. I don't see it being one of those games that gets two versions, kind of like Breath of the Wild was for the Switch and the Wii U, or what I'm thinking Metroid Prime 4 will be for the Switch and the Switch 2, since it releases right about at the same time as the Switch 2 releases. I think it's either part of the end-of-life lineup for the Switch, or it's the first Fire Emblem game on the Switch 2. But then again, it's not a crazy thought to think that it could release on the Switch initially and then they make a port to the Switch 2 with like higher quality and better graphics. But I don't think Fire Emblem is big enough to warrant that in the eyes of Granddaddy Nintendo. I love the franchise with all my heart. I don't think Nintendo loves it as much as the rest of us do. I don't know. But if you're asking me, which is just me, my speculation is I'm leaning towards a 2026 release on the Switch 2. What we know is that a new FE game is in the works, and we know that Genealogy Remake has been long rumored to be that game. We know that it's been rumored for over 3 years now, and we also know that the latest Fire Emblem game has been in development since 2022. I'm not going to say with 100% certainty that Genealogy will be the next game, but I'd be extremely surprised if it wasn't, because while I don't know that any of the sources I've presented in this video are 100% infallible, I think there are enough clues pointing in that general direction to make a somewhat educated guess. But again, if I'm wrong, I'm willing to accept people calling me dumb. Only if I'm wrong though. If you do it before I'm wrong, I'll call you mean. I'll just call you a meanie, okay? Anyways, that's kind of the extent we know. I'll keep covering FE4 news and rumors as the Switch 2's release approaches and as new news comes out. If anything on the game is ever released, I will keep making videos to keep you guys updated. I first played FE4 last year on my stream and really enjoyed it, so I'm quite excited for this remake if it exists. If you do want to see my playthrough, link is in the description below, by the way. Let me know in the comments if you want to see me do a wish list for this remake, what I want to see or maybe don't want to see in the remake. Other than that, I left all my sources that I used for this video in the description. That way you can also validate anything I've said or fact check me if I misquoted somebody or simply gave out a false piece of information. Feel free to give me your 2 cents in the comment section. Other than that, thank you for watching. Leave a like if this was informative, and a huge shout out to all my members who make this channel a reality. Feel free to check out the join button below if you want to help out the channel. Any special shout out goes to all my tier 2 and 3 members, those being Brawler456, Forgotten Fox, Equipment Gameplays, Hirame, Case, Iron Wolf, Rogue Arcadia, Storm Eagle CH, Ollie, Scott Rounch, and Black Rose 42. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.